Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start our Sunday Gita class with some mantras. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamrit Varshine Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Am Tvam Anusandhame Bhagavata Gite Bhavadveshine Namo Astute Vyas Vishal Buddhe फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञान मया प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पानये ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाये गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगत गुरु भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अशवथाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सो तीर न खलु पांडवै नदी कैवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदे रह पे पिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरन यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रम उपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यान अवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुर गना देवाय तस्मै नमः. We are studying chapter 5 and we are towards the end of chapter 5. And the title of this chapter is Karam, Sanyas, Yoga. So last week we ended our class on verse number 20, where Lord Krishna is telling us that resting in Brahma with a steady intellect and undeluded, the knower of Brahma neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. So that means when our will has been united to the will of God, then both pleasure and pain are serenely accepted as His grace. चाहे दुख में या सुख में. Divine knowledge brings this understanding that our self-interest lives in giving pleasure to God. If my God is happy with me, I'm okay with it. Outer circumstances could be good or not so good. And this comes after the surrender to the will of God. So our little self has merged into the divine will. Another way, there is a complete equanimity, serenity. So that's why both pleasure and pain, a devotee accepts as a grace of God. Okay? So now let's start verse number 21, because this we talked about last week. Bahe sparsheshu asakta atma vindati atmane yat sukham sa brahma yoga yuktatma sukham akshayam ashnute. Bahe sparshe. Bahe is external. Sparsh is the contact. So in external contacts or external sense pleasure, asakta atma, one whose mind is unattached, vindati, finds, atmani, in the self, yat means that, sukham, happiness. So he, that person, Brahma Yoga Yukt Atma. Those who are united with God through yoga. Okay. So engaged in the meditation of Brahma. Brahma Yoga Yukt Atma. Sukham, happiness. Akshayam, unlimited, endless. See, Kshaya means something which gets destroyed. Akshay, endless, does not get destroyed. Ashnute, experiences or enjoys. So with the self unattached to the external context, he finds happiness in the self. With the self engaged in the meditation of Brahma, he attains endless happiness. This is a definition of a Karam sannyasi. So complete detachment from the external objects. But that doesn't mean he is unhappy. He has found the source of the eternal happiness, which is called bliss. So through the process of self-development, he learned the process of detachment from the external objects and attachment to the real, the Brahm, the God. And that's why he can experience and live with a total positivity. Because in the previous verse, he said whether it's a happy occasion, whether there's a sukh or a dukh, he's happy. So where is he getting the happiness? From the source, from Brahma. Because contact is there. It's almost like when a dreamer has renounced his contacts with the dream world, he throws away all the dream personality. Whether in the dream personality, the person was a king or a pauper, upon awakening, he understands the reality. So that's why yogi is also called awakened person. An awakened person, the key message in this verse is he is always blissful. Because there's no opposite of bliss ever. It's only bliss, is homogeneous bliss. In the Vedic scriptures, again and again, it has been said, there is a one verse from Bhagavad Puran, Keval Anubhava Anand Savrupaha Parameshwaraha. God's form is made of pure bliss. Keval Anubhav Anand Savrupa. Ramayana says, Jo Anand Sindhu Sukhrashi. God is the ocean. Sindhu means ocean. God is the ocean of bliss and happiness. There's no unhappiness there. Upanishads say the same thing. Taittiriya Upanishad, we learned, Anando Brahmiti Vyajanat. Know God to be bliss. So how do we define God? Only bliss. So all these mantras and verses from the scriptures, they emphasize that divine bliss is the nature of God. God's personality, if you want to call it. And the yogi who absorbs the senses and mind and the intellect in God begins to experience this infinite bliss of God. And this God is seated within also. So outside also, it's inside also. There's no place where God is not. That's why in the temple when we go, there is something beautiful to see with the eyes. There's a beautiful fragrance of the incense or the havan we smell through our nose. We take Prasad and the Charnamat. All that gives the bliss to us, to our senses also, but with the element of divinity in there. But ultimately, when we can just detach from the senses, go inward, we feel bliss of God, the Brahman. So we got to understand this mind and intellect. We got to transcend our mind and intellect from their preoccupations with the external world, at least for a little bit of a time every day. or a few times every day, during our meditation, during our prayers. And when we can keep our heart devoted to the meditation of Brahma, we feel this imperishable, eternal happiness. Okay, the heart word, whenever they use in the scriptures, we got to understand it properly. It's not a physical organ which we have in this body. Heart really means inner instrument of knowing and experiencing. That's called heart. Okay. And for the following reason also, he says, withdraw the senses from the external world of the objects in the next verse. He says, ye hi samsparshida bhoga dukh yoniya evate adhyantavanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddha. Ye means which, he means verily. Samsparshija, born of contact. Okay, like a contact born. Samsparshija, bhogaha, enjoyments, pleasures. Dukh yoniya, source of misery, generators of pain. Dukh yoni. Ev means only, te means they. Adhyantavantaha, having a beginning and an end. Adi and Anta. Kunti, son of Kunti, na means not, teshu, in those. Ramate, rejoices or takes delight. Buddhe, the wise people. He says the enjoyments that are born of contacts. Contact means with the sense organs. Sense organ is contacting the object. So the enjoyments that are born of contacts are only generators of pain. Why? Because they have a beginning and an end. Right? O son of Kunti, the wise do not rejoice in them. Because there's no eternal happiness in there. Eternal happiness is only in Brahma, only in God, not in the sense objects. So we as a seekers try to detach ourselves from the external context in order to enjoy the internal, eternal bliss. See, what he is explaining in this verse is the law of diminishing utility. In all our experiences, we have seen it. We go somewhere, either we stop enjoying it or we have to come back. We enjoy the first piece of chocolate, if somebody likes chocolate. But if somebody says you got to finish the box, you'll feel like throwing up. That is called a law of diminishing utility. Either that thing is taken away from you or you get tired of it. But with the contact with God, it's not like that. There is a pleasure, there's a bliss in the beginning, there's a bliss in the middle, and then there's a bliss in the end also. It satisfies us completely. But the material pleasures, which are called bhog, they cannot satisfy the soul. Okay? Because of these three reasons. One reason is worldly pleasures are finite. Okay? Finite cannot give the same pleasure to the infinite, and the soul is infinite. That is one reason. Worldly pleasures are finite, and a feeling of deficiency remains inherent in them. Okay. Second reason is worldly pleasures are temporary. And bliss of God is eternal. Soul being part of the God is asking for, it's looking for the eternal bliss, not a temporary bliss. doesn't get satisfied in it. And the third reason is worldly pleasures are sentient. They decrease. They themselves are, they don't have the pleasure in them. Okay? A person who's wise understands this and is satisfied only with the infinite. Finite things can only torture us with hopes of getting a more satisfactory joy. We think from here we did not get it, maybe from somewhere else we will. A wise person understands. See, that's why he used the word wise over here. Buddha. But otherwise, it's like a little child. Okay. So the fuller, the diviner joy is gained only when we come to experience the self as explained in the previous verse. See, all these verses, they are connected. We cannot forget the knowledge which he was giving. It was in the previous verse. So contact with the Brahma will give us eternal bliss. Contact with the sense objects will give us only the pain because of these reasons. And when a person begins to enjoy divine bliss, let me tell you, the mind loses all the taste for the material pleasures. Because when you have seen the higher, you have tasted something which is infinite, which is perfect. Anything in this world is very pale to compare to that. You're not attracted to that. So no sane person who has enjoyed the delicious dessert will like to eat a mud. It's like a mud, all this. For a person who has experienced the divine bliss. Verse number 23. Shaknoti ev yasodam prak sharir vimokshanat kam krodh udvam vegam sa yukta sa sukhi nara. Shaknoti is able. He means here. That means in this world right now. In this body. Ev means even, ya means who? Sodum, to withstand. Prak, before. Sharir is the body. Vimokshanat, liberation from, or giving up, or ending this. Kam, krodh, udvam, born of desire and anger. Kam is the desire, krodh is the anger. Vegam, forces, impulse. Sa means he, yuktaha, yogi, yukt. And yukt with what? Yukt with Brahma. That's why it's called yogi. Sa means he, sukhi, happy, naraha, a person. He who is able, while still here. This is the key word in this verse, because sometimes we think that after letting go of this body, in this body we cannot experience it. He says, no, while you are still here in this world, to withstand. Before the liberation from this body, and over here this means a death. Before the death of this body, the impulse born out of desire and anger. He is a yogi. He is a happy man. So clearly he's telling us this desire and the anger we need to work on. Later on we'll see he will tell us there are 3 gateways to hell. And desire and anger are 2 of those 3. And third one he'll tell us greed. Kam, krodh, lobh. But over here he's mentioning desire and anger. Because sometimes seems like what he was talking about, that you can feel this eternal bliss. It seems like it's just a philosophy. Maybe we cannot attain it. But over here, he is very emphatically telling us, before you leave the body, if you work on it, you can experience it. We need to experience it, or we can experience it only in this human body. This is what he's trying to tell us. Don't think that it's not doable, or it will be after death, or the time of the death we can achieve this. No. While living here, right now, right here, if we can work on this. See, he said, withstand. That means the calm and the desires and the anger, they are very strong impulses, but we got to learn how to live in this life with these impulses, not get drowned into it. Learn how to swim in it. Because if a philosophy is only an idealism, then we will not even put any effort to practice it. So that's why these verses over here, Lord Krishna's word, that no, as a human being, you can practice it, and you must practice it. It's nothing something which will you do after leaving from this mortal world, while living in the mortal world. Okay, so this verse instructs us to withstand the urges of desire and anger. And he has been telling us how in the earlier verses, through discrimination based upon knowledge. That's why the Gyan is important, knowledge is important. This human body presents a golden opportunity for the soul to reach the supreme goal of God realization. Only through a human body we can achieve that. Why? Because in the human body we possess the faculty of discrimination, which is called Vivek. Power of discrimination should be exercised, okay, to restrain the impulses of desire and anger. Okay, so this is, see, those are the strong impulses, but God has given us in a human body a beautiful tool to control those two. Power of discrimination, the knowledge. And what is desire actually? Desire is anything which we see, anything which we hear, if we just, without even thinking about it, we just want it. We want to have it. That's a desire, ichha. Okay, it's almost like a storm in our intellect. So this discrimination is also in the intellect. So we control that storm with the intellect. You see something, think about it. Do you need it? Can you do without it? Are you okay without it or not? That's called discrimination. That's called Vivek. Normally, without even thinking about it, we just do things. And then when the result comes, then we feel sorry. So before even having that desire entered in your mind, use the Vivek. Okay, so desire is always about certain object, certain place, a certain person, certain achievement. And anger is what? Anger is when we cannot have that desired object. Anger comes. We know the greater the desire with which we ponder over any object, the greater shall be the anger when we cannot have it, because there could be an obstacle that comes between us and our object of desire. It could be somebody else. Somebody else got it, you did not get it. So anger towards that person also. So desire and anger, they are deeply connected. But a person who has won over joy and grief, who has created a certain amount of detachment from the external objects, or desire for obtaining the pleasure from the objective world, then that means there's no desire. And where there's no desire, hatred is unknown alien factor. And hatred is another way we can understand anger. Okay, these words, they just convey the same message to us. So Lord Krishna is assuring Arjuna, and through Arjuna to all of us who are the devotees or aspirants, that a person can live perfectly happily even while in this form and among these very objects. In this very world, during this very life, if only this spiritual evolution is our goal. We got to remember that this is our goal. Otherwise, there are always kicks from this world, worldly objects and worldly situations. And what sort of a person is resting in Brahm and attains Brahm? He says, Ya antaha sukha, antara rama, tatha anta jyoti, evya, sa yogi brahm nirvanam, brahm bhutaha adhigachati. Ya means who? Antaha sukha, happiness within. So a person whose happiness is within. Antraharama, rejoices within. Tatha means also antaha jyoti, illumined by the inner light. So illuminated within. Ev means even, ya means who. Sa yogi, that yogi. Brahm nirvanam, liberation from material existence. Or moksha, or absolute freedom. Brahma bhutaha, united with the Lord. Becoming Brahma, adhigachati, attains. He who is happily within. Okay, so happiness is within. So a person, after doing all this sadhana, understood that my happiness is in me. So he who is happy within, who rejoices within, Raman. Okay, so it's like a source of the happiness is inside, and you just keep on enjoying that source. Normally people like to do the Raman outside. So within, who is illuminated within, that jyoti, that light is inside. That yogi attains absolute freedom or moksha. Because there's no dependency on anything. No dependency on the place or any other person or any situation. It's a total freedom. He says himself becoming Brahma. Of course, that person becomes Brahma. No dependency. So the previous 3 verses, we learned very clearly through Lord Krishna that none of the usual fields of joy and happiness are visited by a yogi. Because we as human beings, we have not learned it yet. That's why we don't feel this bliss. But he's telling us that this is the homework we need to do. Renouncing them all. Conquering both love and hatred. Only then we can transcend all this lower and achieve the higher. He says this kind of a person alone can be said to be eternally blissful. And that's Brahma. It becomes very difficult to believe that all this can be achieved. But remember, these are the words of God. We got to apply ourselves. We got to do some sadhana and then see the efficacy of this philosophy. Don't think that, no, it's not doable. Inner light. See, he talks about the inner light. Antaha Jyoti. Inner light is the divine knowledge that is bestowed within in the form of realization. That's what self-realization is. And that happens with the grace of God or the grace of a guru. But we got to do our part only when we surrender to him. See, if we don't do our part and we think that grace should be there, it's not going to work. If we want our thirst to be quenched, we must drink some water. So over here, our part is that complete surrender. First, mentally, see that these words are spoken from the mouth of God himself. And then we got to do what he's telling us to do. In Yog Darshan also, Rishi Patanjali said something like that. He said, Ritambara tatra pragya. So that is like in a state of samadhi, one's intellect becomes with realization of the truth, Ritambara pragya. And without surrender, there cannot be a samadhi. That surrender is needed. See, we are all used to only one kind of happiness that comes from the external objects. We are used to that. We get something, go somewhere, have something, somebody says nice words to us, we are happy. That is a dependency on something where we don't have much control, only a little bit control. But this is a different kind of a happiness, another kind of a happiness that we experience from within when we absorb our mind in God. In God. If we do not experience happiness within, if we have not tasted it yet, we won't be able to permanently resist external temptations. Maybe temporarily here and there, but not permanently. But when the bliss of God starts flowing within the heart, then the fleeting external pleasures seem trivial. Okay, so first we have to believe in the words of God, then we have to do what he's telling us to do, and then we'll feel it also. Okay, we'll discover it ourselves. This is a sense of bliss, serenity, security, the inward joy. Okay, not just a here and there flickering joy, eternal joy, constantly experiencing this bliss. And this kind of a well-developed seeker who's striving constantly on this path has to stay on the path and then achieve this. Okay, light of the pure consciousness. Then he says in the next verse, verse number 25, Labhante Brahm Nirvanam Rishya Kshen Kalmashaha Chin Dvedha Yat Atmanaha Sarvabhut Hiterata. Labhante, obtain or achieve. Brahm Nirvanam, absolute freedom. Rishya, holy person, the rishis. Kashin Kalmashaha, those whose sins are destroyed. Chin Dvedha, doubts are annihilated. They have been removed completely. Yat Atmanaha, those who are self-controlled, that means disciplined. Sarvabhut Hiterata. Sarvabhut Hite means in the welfare of all beings. Rata means rejoicing. Okay? Because he has mentioned earlier that this kind of a freedom, this contact with Brahma, this eternal happiness is to be achieved in this lifetime as a human being. So once you have achieved it, what do? Do you just sit like a statue? No. This is what he's answering. What do these personalities, these yogis do after achieving that self-realization? He says, those rishis obtain absolute freedom or moksha, whose sins have been destroyed, whose dualities have been annihilated, who are self-controlled and intent on welfare of all beings. Okay, so part of this verse is telling us how they achieved it, that Brahm Nirvan. And after achieving that Brahm Nirvan, what do? They do the Lok Seva. They help others. They don't say that we are better than you. You cannot achieve. We have achieved. They're saying you can achieve too. They encourage people like us. They guide people like us. They inspire people like us. But they have gone through this struggle they have gone through before. Because it's a pretty glorious state. But in order to reach that glorious state, these rishis, the sins are sins. What is a sin? Sin means any obstacle. Anything which comes in between me and my goal, that's a sin. So they destroyed them all. They destroyed all those worldly desires. They don't have any anger. They don't have any greed. They don't have any jealousy. Those are the sins. So they destroyed them all. Chin dvedha. Any kind of a doubt. They don't have any doubt anymore. Because doubt is always about this duality. Light and dark, day and night, pain and pleasure, all those are dualities. They removed them all with the sadhana. And they are fully self-controlled, disciplined, full control over their senses. They are not slave to the senses. They are the master of the senses. They are the master of this mind also. And they became rishis. They became yogis. Some through meditation, some through other kind of a sadhana. Whatever it took, they did it. When a person who is a sadhak, striving diligently, with his senses well under his control, comes to wash off all his sinful mental impressions, only then he can gain the joy of the self. This joy we all want to feel. We want to have it, but we got to do our work also. Agitation, whenever our mind is agitated, in Sanskrit, which is called vikshep, we got to look at it. More the desires, more the agitation. More the desires, more the anger. For not be able to accomplish all those desires, agitation. Or when the desires have been obtained, the objects have been obtained, greed for more and more. That is a vikshep, agitation. That's a sin. And consequence of the vikshep is more the agitation, more the covering on our self. That is called avarna. They go hand in hand. So that's why he's just very clearly telling us, control your desires. Get rid of the worldly desires and the anger also. If you want to have the knowledge of your real nature, if you want to rediscover yourself as the self, So it's a very joyous ride to the palace of the truth. That's what he's telling us again and again. And then after that, what happens? Lok Seva. In Ramayana, there is a saying, Par upkar vachan man kaya. Sat sahaj subhahu khagraya. He says the trait of compassion is the intrinsic nature of saints. Compassion. Because often we wonder, why does God and the godly people come this earth? Because we came here in this body because of some unfinished karmas. But why do they come? They come because they have a compassion for us. Par upkar. They want to guide us. They feel for us. So the trait of compassion is the intrinsic nature of saints, and motivated by this compassion, what do? They use their words, their mind and body, because we identify ourselves or we work through these instruments, our body, our mind, and our speech. So they look like us, they talk like us, and with their words, they guide us. Okay, for the welfare of others. So, par upkar vachan man kaya. Lok seva. That becomes their recreation. See, Rata, rejoicing. It's not a burden on them. When we have to do something good for somebody, we want to make sure that others know. We want to publicize it. But no, they just take a rejoice in it. Have you seen on the Facebook or on the social media? On one hand, they are giving something to a poor person. On the other hand, they are taking the selfie. And they post it. Okay. But these great rishis, they just want to help us. They don't want any kind of a publicity about it. Okay. And they use their body, mind, and intellect. It's almost like they are making the offering in that sacred fire of activity while remaining rest within themselves. And themselves is the Brahma. Because that's where they are rejoicing, not the rejoice. They don't want any kind of a happiness from the, or a clapping from the world. So the highest welfare activity is to help a person unite his or her consciousness with God. That is the highest activity. My own Guruji used to say that if you can ignite the fire of love for God even in one person, किसी की भक्ति बढ़ा देना, that is the best deed you can do. काम क्रोध वियुक्त नाम यति नाम यत चेत साम अविता ब्रह्म निर्वाणम वर्तते विदित आत्मनम. काम क्रोध वियुक्त नाम, those who are free from desire and anger. I mean, you can see that Lord Krishna keeps on telling us to control these two urges. So that means it's so important. That's why he keeps on repeating. Yati Nam, saintly person, self-controlled person. Yat Chet Sam, of those who have controlled their thoughts. Abhita, on all sides. Brahm Nirvanam, absolute freedom, Vartate exists. Vidit Atmanam, those who have realized the self. Absolute freedom exists on all sides for those self-controlled ascetics who are free from desire and anger, who have controlled their thoughts and who have realized the self. We will discuss this verse. We'll start our next week's class with the discussion of this verse. But today, remember, whether he has used a word rishi or an ascetic or a yogi, he has again and again mentioned control of the desire and anger. So this is something we need to work on. First, we got to acknowledge our own desires. And anger has many forms. Many forms. There could be a very lukewarm anger. There could be a very strong anger, but that is an anger. So any form of anger. Sometimes anger we show with our words, sometimes with our eyes, sometimes with our body. So all anger. Whenever we see any kind of agitation inside us, that's anger. Be aware of it. Because we are on the path of Brahma Nirvana. And again, another thing he mentioned, right here in this body, we are supposed to work on it. We cannot postpone it any further. So think about it, and we'll start our next Sunday's class with verse number 26. Om Purnamada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much for coming.